Bridge to all decks. It's that time, finally, or maybe not finally, season 3 of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Mantz.
And I'm Steve Morris, and I feel like maybe I feel sort of like the cast and crew of Star Trek felt when they were facing season 3. A lot of excitement and also a fair amount of trepidation.
Well, Steve, I just remember very early on when we first started doing Enterprise Incidents, we were so excited about season 1. We were maybe even more excited about season 2. And then we kind of laughed a little. Oh, yeah, what's going to happen when we get to season 3? Ha, ha, ha. Well, we are here. It is season 3, and the conversations ahead for the next 24 episodes are going to get really, really interesting and may even be some of our very best conversations on Enterprise Incidents overall.
Well, and just like there would be no season 3 of Star Trek without the incredible fans that wrote in and supported the show, there would be no Enterprise Incidents without, as Scott has named them, the Enterprisers. And they have been so supportive in keeping the show going. And one of the best ways that they can support us is by going to Anchor, which you can find by just looking at the show notes, clicking on the link, and you could subscribe to Enterprise Incidents for as little as 99 cents a month. We do this as a labor of love, but it is a lot of labor, and we could use your help.
And definitely head over to our Apple podcast page for Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve and leave a review, because those reviews on the Apple podcast platform are really, really crucial to helping more people discover Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. So on behalf of Scott and Steve, big thank you to the Enterprisers out there.
Now, my guess, Scott, is that there was a lot of stuff going on between season 2 and season 3, and I bet you're about to tell me what it was.
Yes. So generally speaking, Steve, I think it's a foregone conclusion that season 3 it just wasn't as good as season 1 or season 2. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that is accurate.
Okay. Now here's the other question. We're looking at season 3 and looking at the drop in quality because we're comparing it to season 1 and season 2, which of course we're going to because it's all one show. So here's my question. What if season 3 of Star Trek was actually season 1, and that one season was all we had of Star Trek? Now, forget about, then we would never have gotten syndication and all that stuff. Let's say you're only looking at season 1 and not judging it compared to the first 2 seasons. How does season 3 feel to you now?
It's a really interesting question. Here's what I'll say. When I was a kid, everything that was in the realm of science fiction, superheroes, fantasy, adventures, I loved. And I wasn't very discerning in terms of the quality of those things. Like, I was a DC Comics collector because my dad had read DC Comics. So I grew up on 70s Superman and Justice League and Batman. And those comics aren't that good. And I read them over and over and over again. And I loved them. If I only had season 3, it would be like that. It would be like, I would totally have watched them as a kid in syndication. I totally would have liked them, but I don't think I would have been going back to them as a grown-up. That's the big difference.
That's a fair point. And when it comes to season 3, I feel like it gets a bad rap. I understand why it does. But if you look at the season itself and take away that you're comparing it to a first season that has Sitting on the Edge of Forever and a second season that has Mirror, Mirror and Doomsday Machine, let's just say you're just looking at the third season. More than half of the third season is very, very good. And even the episodes that aren't very good are still decent enough. They're watchable. They're okay. There's only about 3 or 4 episodes from season 3 that I do not watch at all, that I have not watched in many, many, many years, maybe even a couple of decades, where going back to rewatch it for the first time for the sake of this podcast is definitely going to be interesting. But I think if you just judge season 3 on its own merits, it is still a good season of Star Trek. And when you put the other 2 seasons back into the fold here, I will take more than half of a good season of season three over no season three of Star Trek at all. Like when you were going back to rewatch certain episodes, what were some of the episodes that you would rewatch the most?
Well, there are a whole bunch. I agree with you. What I think I would just say it's like the whole average drops down. You know what I mean? There are some really good episodes in season 3 that match up to the middle of seasons 1 and 2. That's how I would put it. And so there are a whole in season 1 and 2, there's a whole bunch of episodes that are really, really solid that aren't the greatest episodes of Star Trek of all time. That's how I feel about the good episodes of season 3. There's some that are solid, but not the great episodes of Star Trek of all time. For me, I mean, there's a bunch. There's Enterprise Incidents, which our show is named after.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a really fun episode. I cannot wait to talk about Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. And I will tell you something, and I think I mentioned to you this before. I started taking notes of things I want to say about that episode when we were in season 1
Oh, wow.
because I kept thinking about it. And I know that's an episode that a lot of people dismiss as being cheesy or being so obvious. And I don't think it is. I actually think there's way more there than people give it credit for. So that actually almost goes up into one of the great episodes for me. I know that a lot of people wouldn't put it there. And there's Day of the Dove and the Tholian Web. I mean, there's a bunch of good episodes in season. And I actually like the Cloudminders probably much more than most people do. I think that's also a really interesting episode. So those are probably some of my ones that I would go back to the most, and I'm most looking forward to talking about. How about you?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the cloud minders because that's going to lead into a question that I'm going to have for you in just a short bit. But I would say more than any other episode of season three, the one that I really truly love the most, one that I've rewatched as many times as Amok Time or City on the Edge of Forever or Balance of Terror, is what you mentioned, Day of the Dove. I think that is a stellar episode. And it is also one, when we get to that deep dive, we'll find out that that is one that William Shatner was really, really, really proud of and told the writers and producers who were working on Star Trek,
Hmm.
we should be doing more shows like this. But I do love Let That Be Your Last Battlefield more than most people. I think, there's an episode that I think that people are unfair on that I wouldn't say I love, but I certainly like it a lot is The Empath. And there are other episodes that I want to get into when it comes to the question of which deep dives, that's a different question, are we most looking forward to and which ones are we dreading? But for right now, the good news, Steve, was that Star Trek was renewed for season three. And if you were one of those,
Yay!
yay, the best news ever. So, Steve, if you were one of those fans who did write a letter to NBC, okay, or signed the petition, how do you think you would have felt during the closing credits of the Omega Glory when the voice of NBC announced that Star Trek would be back for a third season?
I'm trying to think of like what some of the shows that were canceled that made me so sad. There have been a bunch of shows where I was absolutely crushed when they didn't come back. And although I can't think of them on the top of my head because I'm not always that good at that, I can remember just going, God, if you would just give me one more season, it was so good. It was so great. And I can imagine if it was one of those shows and they came back and said, we're going to give you one more, I would have been absolutely thrilled. Not only would I be absolutely thrilled, but thinking about it now, I would have a party. For the first episode of season 3, I would have had all my geeky friends over and sit down and watch the premiere and just be glued to the TV set to see it.
That would have been an interesting party, knowing what episode actually aired as the first episode of season three, which, by the way, was not even the first episode that was produced by season three, but more on that in a second. The only other time in my certainly my childhood where, because I wasn't even born when the original Star Trek premiered, but I was definitely born when it was canceled. I was born in '68, so the only show that I can recall back from my childhood that when it was canceled, I was really, really upset about it was Battlestar Galactica.
Mm.
I was such a big fan of that show. And I did watch that when it ran from 78 to 79. And I remember that last episode where, you see the transmission of the Eagle landing on the moon and no one's around to see the transmission. It was such a great, great show. And I loved the reboot. But But I just, if I was one of those letter writers, I would have felt such victory. And at a time with with all the peaceful protests, the peace protests that were going on, and the younger generation taking a stand, I think I would have been really, really, really proud of that. So yes, the good news was that season 3 got picked up. And just like with season 2, when season 2 got picked up, it was for an initial order of 16 episodes, with the option for NBC to run a full 28 episodes. And that got shortened to 26. So when season 3 got renewed, it was just like with season 2 for an initial order of 16 episodes, with the option to pick up a full 26 episodes. So in the end, the third season only came out to 24 episodes. And I think after watching some of those later third season episodes, it's probably a good thing that we only got 24, and that season 3 wound up being the shortest season of
Right.
the original series. But one of the books that I've been reading or rereading to get so much information and research out of, like for these deep dives of here on Enterprise Incidents, is Mark Cushman's 3-volume series, These Are the Voyages.
Hmm.
So much of the information that I get with regards to the outlines and when certain scenes were filmed and all that came from those books. And there is one particular bit of trivia, Steve, that I did not know about until I reread this portion of These Are the Voyages, Volume 3. So Nichelle Nichols. So we all know the story about how in season 1 she was thinking about leaving, and who talked her into staying?
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a pretty big peer to say,
Yeah.
do not leave that show. Well, as it turns out, Steve, at the end of season 2, Nichelle Nichols was once again thinking of leaving Star Trek. And the producer of Mannix, which was also a Desilu turned Paramount show, made Nichelle Nichols an offer to jump from Star Trek to Mannix to play Mannix's secretary, Peggy Fair. But the
Mm,
producer of Mannix said, I'm only going to do this if I have the blessing of Roddenberry, because, they were all on the same family,
sure.
so to speak. Well, what did Roddenberry do but go back to Nichelle Nichols and say, I think it's a bad idea for you to leave Star Trek for Mannix. Mannix has only been on for a year. It's an untested, untried show. They're still finding their way. Star Trek is really popular. He talked her into staying on Star Trek as Uhura for the third season. Well, as it turns out, uh, Gail Fisher, who was cast as Peggy Fair, did win an Emmy for Mannix. Mannix went on to run for a total of 7 seasons, and Star Trek was canceled after the third season. So sounds like Nichelle Nichols chose poorly.
Well, it's such a hard one because who could have known where Star Trek was going to go? I
Right.
mean, she has a lifetime of work based on, her whole career based on these 3 seasons of Star Trek. Would she have gotten those had she not been on the third season? Probably to some degree. But if there isn't the future domination of Star Trek, then yeah, that's the wrong choice. And
Yeah.
it's so hard. It's so hard on an actor in that moment. And knowing what I know about Roddenberry, I bet he put the pressure on, you
Oh,
know,
yeah. Yeah. Oh,
you know.
sure. Well, here's the other thing. So, as we talked about when we were doing our deep dives on season 2, especially the latter half of season 2. So, what was the trope, Steve, that even you and I said they dipped their toe into that well way too many times?
I think it went up to the calf at this point, and it was parallel Earths.
Exactly. The parallel Earth stories just got to be, especially when you watch the show in production order, they just were like, okay, what planet can we revisit now? So the mandate for season 3 from NBC said, no more parallel planet stories. And I don't blame them. I'm glad they made that choice. I guess the Paradise Syndrome, with the American Indians kind of got slipped through, but that's a great episode, and I'm okay with that. So, what was the other problem that Star Trek had in its first 2 seasons, especially the second season, was the time slot. Friday nights at 8:30. Now, when Star Trek was on Thursday nights at 8:30, it had its biggest audience. So then season 2, it moved to Friday nights at 8:30. It lost some of its audience, but it was still strong enough and the episodes were still strong enough because at 8:30 you still have like the younger crowd who before they go out to the parties later that night. Well, so Gene Roddenberry was promised for the third season of Star Trek that it would have its best time slot ever. That time slot, can you imagine if Star Trek ran on Monday nights at 7:30?
Sounds real good.
Sounds really good. Monday nights at 7:30. First of all, it's so early that even younger people who watch TV could still watch it before they went to bed. And it's Monday night, so no one's going out. That meant that Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which was on at 8 o'clock on Mondays, would move to Friday night. And in exchange for that better time slot, Gene Roddenberry, who kind of stepped away from Star Trek for a little bit in the beginning of the second season, and even by the end of the second season, he still was not the showrunner. Roddenberry promised, you give me that Monday night time slot, I will come back to do this show as the day-to-day showrunner. That's one of the great what ifs. I mean, what if Gene Coon would have stayed? I mean, that's like the bigger one to me. But what if Roddenberry would have come back to season 3? And how do you think Roddenberry as a showrunner would have affected some of these episodes?
It's a great question. I think, it all depends on which Roddenberry we get.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we get the guy who came up with Star Trek and was really running the show when we had episodes like Where No Man Has Gone Before and Balance of Terror and Charlie X and Naked Time and all those, I think we get some real good Star Trek. Later on, Roddenberry, even into the early 70s, I start to hear things where I go, "Ooh, I don't know that I like that so much." And thinking about some of the fights with Gene Coon and how some of that stuff went down. I mean, he is the great bird of the galaxy. And there are many things about him, particularly later on, that I'm not as much of a fan of, so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? That's a really good point because if we would have gotten the Roddenberry who produced the first half of the first season, the one who, even though the writers themselves didn't like being rewritten, in each one of those deep dives that we did on Enterprise Incidents, you and I both agreed that a lot of the changes that Roddenberry made to those scripts that he rewrote and did not take credit for were really, really great decisions. If we got that guy, I think season 3 would have been great. Now, if we would have gotten the Roddenberry who sort of took control of Star Trek again a little bit towards the end of the second season after Gene Coon left, the Roddenberry who was a little heavy-handed in some ways with his approach to A Private Little War and certainly the Omega Gory. I'm not sure how season 3 would have really turned out. It might have been a little too much with the heavy-handed. Like, I mean, look at an episode like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield was heavy-handed even without Roddenberry. But overall, I think that the show definitely would have been different. It is one of the great what-if stories. Now, before we get to the bad news, Steve, there were some changes in store for season 3. First of which is it never occurred to me that after seeing the Klingons in episodes like Errand of Mercy and Friday's Child and Trouble with Tribbles and Private Little War, that up to this point, the first 2 seasons, we still have not seen the Klingon battlecruiser.
That's true.
Well, in season 3, we got it. Designer Matt Jeffries created the Klingon battlecruiser, which was first used in A Land of Troyes. And remember that deal with the shuttlecraft and the AMT model kit?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, they didn't have to do a whole interior like they did with the shuttlecraft, but the producers made a deal with AMT, the model company, for the rights to the model kit of the Klingon battlecruiser in exchange for paying to have a filming miniature built. And that miniature was about 24 inches long. And as for the model kit, if you were going to buy a model kit of the Klingon battlecruiser in 1968, it would set you back a whopping $2.50.
Big money.
Did you have any of those models?
No, I did not have any of those original Star Trek models.
I had the original Enterprise, And of course, I tried to build it, and it came out terrible. I should have left it in the box sealed. I could have, had a real great collector's item on my hands. Well,
Yeah.
another big change, and this one actually is for the worse, is after working her way up to be the story consultant for Star Trek towards the end of season one and all through season two, Dorothy Fontana left the series, and that was a big blow to the series.
Yeah.
I mean, what she did as the story editor, look what she did. Let's say, well, first, I mean, obviously, the scripts that she wrote, especially Journey to Babel, but look at the way she rewrote the script for The Ultimate Computer. Boy, did she just make that into a gem. So she did write stuff for season three. She wrote The Enterprise Incident, Our Namesake, and under the pseudonym of Michael Richards, which is telling, she did write the screenplays for That Which Survives. And you would never know that this episode was written by Fontana. At least probably it would have been better. The Way to Eden.
Do you know why she left the show?
Yes, she left the show because she felt like by the end of the second season that she wanted to write for more than just Star Trek. She still wanted to write for Star Trek, but she didn't want to get burned out by the day-to-day processing of reading other scripts and rewriting and giving notes and all that. She just wanted to just write her scripts and go off and do other things. So that was why she left. And replacing her as the new story editor that decision was made by the new executive producer. So the new story editor was Arthur Singer. So here's the other thing. You and I have talked about budgets, per episode budgets on every episode we've done so far in Enterprise Incidents. So the budget for season one was $193,500. The budget for season two was $187,500, and that fell another $5,000 or so by the midpoint of season two. So season three, when Star Trek was renewed for season three, you have these automatic increases in the salary of the casts. So that's going to eat into the budget. And then on top of that, the budget was lowered to $178,500. So look at season one, $193,500. Look at season three, $178,500. That's $15,000 less per episode.
Well, and I wonder what I don't know if you know what all the bumps in the salaries were, but my guess is that's probably another $5,000 at least.
Exactly. Probably more than that. But Steve, you're absolutely right. So you have less to produce an actual show, which for one thing, that's why there was only one episode of season three where they actually went out and went on location. That was the Paradise Syndrome. And that's also why for many of the later third season episodes, it doesn't feel like there's anybody on the Enterprise in the lower decks.
Yeah. Can you imagine, by the way, if the cast and crew of Star Trek from the 60s got to take a look at what a Star Trek set looks like today? And what kind of money and obviously there's been inflation. So the millions of dollars they're spending today would be much less than those. But I was watching Strange New Worlds and just going, man, these are big sets.
Yeah.
They are big, huge sets with massive amounts of special effects, incredible costumes. And I just go, and here they're trying to get by on $170, whatever $1,000 you said it was. Their eyes would have exploded.
I felt the same way. That's the thing when I was watching Strange New Worlds, which I'm only 3 episodes in and I really like it a lot. But that's the thing that really struck me is like the engineering set is huge. Sick bay is huge. And the corridors are huge. Can you imagine if the original series was shot on this Enterprise sets for Strange New Worlds? My goodness gracious, that would have been awesome. And a lot of people have been saying to us on our Facebook page and on social media and on our Apple Podcast reviews. When are you going to do Strange New Worlds? And my feeling is that if you and I were going to do Strange New Worlds, I would want to do it when it's finished, so we could do it as a complete body of work. That's my feeling. What do you think?
I haven't really thought about it. All I can tell you is 3 episodes in, I'm loving it.
Yeah.
I really like it a lot.
I love it. I'm so happy to hear you say that. Some other minor changes. So the graphics, the title graphics, the logo and
Mhm.
the credits, those for the first two seasons, those were done in yellow. And in the third season, that color, for whatever reason, no idea why, it was changed to blue. And the final big change before we get to the bad news part is the uniforms. So the uniforms for season three were more of a polyester cotton kind of thing.
Mhm.
The uniforms for the first two seasons were velour. Now, in the first few episodes of each season, one and two, the velour costumes look great. But the problem is that they shrank a lot.
Mm.
So by the end of the second season, when Shatner is wearing a velour shirt that is a little too small, it was very noticeable, and that's when the velour didn't look as good. But the polyester shirts from season three, I don't like those shirts as much as the velour. When you look at like the first part of season two, like that's when the velour shirts look their best. I think that's when the crew looked their best. The polyester shirts, I'm kind of mixed on. Like on Nimoy and DeKelly, it looked good, but on Shatner, I don't think it looked as good. Which
Hmm.
do you like the polyester shirts?
I literally right now I'm opening up episodes and looking at the costumes because I never thought about it before. So I don't really have a strong opinion about it.
Well, now we get to the bad news.
Okay.
Okay.
So the polyester was not the bad
The
news.
polyester was good news compared to what's coming, Steve.
Okay.
So NBC was going to give Star Trek its best time slot ever with Monday nights at 7:30. Well, guess what? They changed their mind. After deciding that Laugh-In was actually doing really well on Mondays, NBC decided to keep Star Trek on Friday nights, which maybe if it was on Friday nights at 8:30, that would have been okay. The problem is that NBC moved Star Trek from Friday night at 8:30 to Friday night at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Now, that demographic, like the college crowd, the younger crowd that was watching Star Trek, Friday nights at 8 o'clock, especially if you're in college, you're not watching TV. What are you doing on Friday night at 10 o'clock if you're in college?
Well, what I was doing was probably going down to Blondie's Pizza on Telegraph Avenue by myself, getting a slice of pepperoni, and then walking to the arcade and playing video games by myself because I didn't have that many friends to go hang out with. So that's what I was doing on Friday night in college. But there were other people who were having well, I don't know if they're having more fun with me, but they were definitely being more social than me.
Well, you know what? I got to tell you, Steve. When I was going to Penn State University, they had this massive arcade that I would find myself in as many times as well. Usually on Friday nights,
Yeah.
and there was a great pizza place close by. So we were living very similar lives on both coasts. But no, that Friday night time slot for college kids, even though they were forced to make a decision, because they couldn't tape the episodes, they
Right.
were like, I'm going out. It's Friday night. I want to blow off some steam. So they
Can I
lost. Yeah,
can I speculate about something?
sure.
So I have no evidence of this. Obviously, you know way more about this stuff than me, but I really wonder if they ever intended on giving Star Trek that time slot. My gut is because Laugh-In was huge, a
Huge.
huge show, and Star Trek was a show they didn't even really want back. Here's what I bet happened: is that all the Laughing people said, we want more money. And they went, we're going to move, you know what? We're going to move you to a crappier time slot and
Uh-huh.
we're going to put Star Trek there. And it was all about making a deal with Laughing. That there was never an intention of putting Star Trek on at Monday at 7:30 ever.
That's, I never thought about that, but I think there is definitely some good speculation to that, especially under the circumstances. And it could have just more been just, lip service to make Roddenberry happy while they were
Exactly.
really, really just trying to make, Rowan and Martin's laughing happy. But regardless, Leonard Nimoy said about the Friday night time slot, he said, they put us on Friday night at 10 o'clock, which was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They were saying, quote, nobody wants to see this show. So they put us on at a time slot where nobody could watch it just to prove that they were right. And Dorothy Fontana, never one to mince words, said NBC meant to kill it, and they killed it with that time slot. So guess who felt betrayed?
I would think the whole cast, but Roddenberry in particular.
Yeah, well, the whole cast definitely was very, very upset about it, and morale on the show when they came back to it was on the lower side because of it. But yeah, Gene Roddenberry felt absolutely betrayed, and instead of coming back to play a bigger part in Star Trek, he distanced himself even further, opening the door to find another showrunner. And Bob Justman said that Gene had given up on any possibility of Star Trek becoming popular. He moved off the lot, and to all sense and purpose, he was lost to us. I mean, that like the what a roller coaster. Oh, we're renewed. Oh, we're going to put you on at 7:30 on Mondays, and now we're going to put you on Friday nights at 10. It's like, why even bother renewing us? That was just such a that's another big what if. Like, what if Star Trek got
Sure.
that Monday slot? Man, oh man, in a mirror universe, Star Trek was on Monday nights at 7:30.
Having worked a bit in this industry and nowhere near as successful as any of the people we're talking about in any way, I'll let you in on a secret that's not such a secret. This is how it is. The numbers of disappointments of almost what I mean, there's so many times where I had the show and this network said, yeah, I think we're going to go with this. And I was getting all excited and then it didn't happen. And the number of friends I've had who have been almost there or had their show. There's a show I wrote for that I wrote 2 episodes for that has never come out in the United States
Oh,
and
is that right?
probably never will. It's all made. It's aired in China. Never going to come out here. I don't think I'm legally even allowed to say what it was. Like and my good friends were the showrunners. They created 50 episodes of this show, 2 seasons, and it has never aired in the United States.
That's
Like
unbelievable. Wow.
no, I mean, this is what I'm saying is like, this is all the time. This is, there's a reason why I'm doing podcasts mostly now, because you just get tired of getting jerked around. It's such a terrible, terrible industry. And this is just kind of par for the course. It's only because Star Trek is such a big thing that we're all pouring over these events and going, oh my God, this is terrible, which of course it is,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, this business is really something. I mean, wow, that's a loaded comment right there. That it's really something. So I remember when we had Ralph Sinetsky on our show. I can't remember if it was for Obsession or Return to Tomorrow. He asked why John Meredith Lucas did not come back for season 3, and at the time I didn't know. Well, after doing some research in not just Mark Cushman's These Are the Voyages, but other research as well. So John Meredith didn't come back and he was the showrunner for season 2 of Star Trek after Gene Kuhn left, and he also he directed The Ultimate Computer and he wrote Patterns of Force. So John Meredith Lucas was just as surprised as anyone else when he was not asked to return as the showrunner for season 3. And the reason he was not asked to return is because Roddenberry, who was going to handpick his replacement, handpick the new showrunner for season 3, he felt that Lucas just wasn't as up to the responsibility as a showrunner should be. And he was basing that decision on the fact that an episode like The Changeling, which is a great episode, and Lucas wrote it, but he was heavily rewritten by Dorothy Fontana. And when he did come on as the showrunner for the rest of season 2, a lot of the scripts that he produced had already had extensive work on them done by, of course, Gene Kuhn, and Fontana was still there doing a whole lot of rewriting like she did for The Ultimate Computer, which Lucas directed. So the reason he wasn't asked back was because Roddenberry just felt like he wasn't good enough and they could find someone better. But after all the conversations we had during our first 2 seasons, Steve, there is one person who absolutely deserved to be bumped up to that showrunner, and that person was Robert H. Justman. He paid his dues with all those notes, and he came up with a lot of great ideas. And of course, he was definitely more of a numbers person because he was always thinking about the budget, but he was also very, very creative. So he was even lobbied by Herb Solow, who was the executive in charge of production, to be like Herb Solow said, "No, Bob Justman's your guy." So What do you think happened?
Well, I mean, he didn't get the gig.
Right. Yeah, he did not
uh,
get it.
it's funny. I see. Obviously, we've talked a lot about Robert Justman. Did he write at all?
No, he never got a screenplay credit, but he came up with ideas. He made
Hmm.
suggestions on how to keep the budget in check. He definitely, like, if one of the other outside writers came up with some idea that called for, like, thousands of extras. He said, "Well, can't we just, like, shoot it in engineering so you only have 6 people?" You know what I mean? Like, he was really thinking along those ways.
A showrunner is like, it is an unbelievably hard job, and because a showrunner is the creative overseer of everything, from casting to sets to all of the scripts, and they also have to deal with budgets and the network and all this stuff. I think being able to make good suggestions is a long way from being a showrunner. Now that doesn't mean that I don't think he could have done the job, and maybe he could have, but that is a serious. I mean, there's a reason why Gene Kuhn was apparently doing some amphetamines to keep up
That's
with
right.
this incredibly, and there's a reason why Roddenberry gets burnt out and has to leave. Like the keeping control of putting out 20 plus episodes of television, that is no small feat. So if and particularly because the TV shows work differently in different shows, but in general, the showrunner is a writer, because TV is a writer dominated medium, whereas film is a director's dominated medium. And so bringing in someone who isn't necessarily a writer, that could be real troublesome, because you need that Gene Kuhn who can come in and do that last polish to go, okay, this is what's going to go out. Could Justman have done that?
That is
You
a
know,
great question, and an absolutely great perspective, one that I wholeheartedly agree with. And in that sense, Justman had not had that background and training to, and also you're talking about, you talk about how complex and how demanding it is to be a showrunner for a series. There was nothing like Star Trek in the late 60s.
right,
And,
right.
and a lot of these producers and writers would have told you that Star Trek is the hardest series to work on, to produce, and certainly to write for. So when Gene Roddenberry, when it came time for him to pick his replacement after he almost stepped back into the showrunner role, he went with a producer named Fred Freiberger. Fred
Hmm.
Freiberger's name is the name that you see at the end of every episode in the third season. Before Fred Freiberger got involved in the business, he was involved in World War II. He was a veteran from World War II, a former World War II POW who was shot down and jumped out of a plane over Nazi Germany. And
Wow.
with a name like Freiberger, he was a Jewish guy jumping
Yeah.
out of a plane in the middle of Nazi Germany. So
Wow.
lucky to be alive. But as a producer for television, he produced shows like Ben Casey, The Wild Wild West, Iron Horse, and then after Star Trek, Space 1999, The $6 Million Man. As a writer for television, he wrote for shows like Wanted Dead or Alive, Rawhide, and then after Star Trek, Starsky and Hutch, and Superboy. And he is the writer of the cheesy classic sci-fi film, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Ah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, that's an interesting list of credits there. So Freiberger signed his contract on March 28th, 1968, and Bob Justman got the news that he was not going to be the new showrunner producer, but he was given the title of co-producer, and he reluctantly stayed on. He wanted out of the show by that point, but the people at Paramount said, please stay, and we'll hook you up with another show after this is all over. So he stayed on. I mean, when I really think about it, Steve, when you think about the arc of Star Trek, the arc of those 3 seasons, and looking at the peaks like we did when we covered Mirror Mirror and Doomsday Machine and Journey to Babel and Amok Time, and now you're past that peak, and looking at the drop in quality and the reasons for that drop in quality, and for the way that NBC basically had it in for Star Trek, it's a tragedy. It feels like a tragedy.
I mean, I'm guessing that you've had to keep working on a gig at some point when it didn't feel good anymore. you know?
Yes, I did.
It's hard. It's
Yes,
real
it
tough.
is. Yeah.
You know, I had a job. This is just, I had a dumb job and I was working for a boss who made us do, and I won't go into the details because it doesn't matter, but he made us do like 3 days of heavy work that ended up being for nothing. And then we had to undo it all for 3 more days. And it was like, from that point forward, I became a less good worker because I was just didn't trust this guy and I was angry and I felt mistreated and I felt unappreciated. It's hard to, and writing TV shows is hard, and acting in TV shows is hard, and directing them is hard, and it's hard to keep going and putting, swinging for the fences when nobody cares about you. You know, it's
I got to
rough.
tell you, Steve, boy, you just hit the last couple of years of my life at my former job right on the head. I was very, very unhappy where I was working. It was a full-time job with benefits, and
Yeah,
I was a married man, and I was trying to be responsible and do the right thing. But not only did it make me miserable, but it made me an unpleasant person to be around because I was so miserable.
yeah.
So yeah, I feel your pain. I feel Bob Justman's pain, but but here's the thing. Now, this is where I try to turn it around, Steve, and take these lemons and squeeze them until you got a nice big tall glass of lemonade. In spite of all these problems, in spite of all these things stacked against Star Trek, working against its favor. These powers that be who were like, nope, Star Trek, that's it. We're gonna just let it die. 10 o'clock on Fridays, and that's the end of it. We just want Star Trek to go away. I think they still produce some damn fine episodes in the circumstances. So my next question for you is not just what are your favorite episodes, but when it comes to our purpose here on enterprise incidents. Our purpose for our supporters, our enterprisers, our fans. I love calling our fans enterprisers. Hashtag that. So, what are maybe the 4 or 5 episodes that you can't wait to do our deep dive conversations on?
Well, two I've already mentioned, which are Let That Be Your Last Battlefield and The Cloudminders. Those are two I'm really thinking about because I think they have things to say. Even though they're not perfect episodes, I think they're dealing with issues and ideas that actually might have more for us to consider than maybe you would think of at the beginning. I really like Day of the Dove like you do. And I'm curious about, because I've never looked at it that seriously. And I think there's going to be a lot there for that one too. I'm curious. So one of the things, as you've mentioned many times, that we've been doing is thinking about these episodes as part of a continuity and seeing how these characters developed. And I'll tell you, when I first had that thought, which was way, way back at the very beginning of season 1, it was in Enemy Within, where I was thinking about what that experience did to Captain Kirk. There was another episode in the 3rd season that I was like, oh, Enemy Within relates to this thing.
Ooh, what was it?
And that episode is the Paradise Syndrome.
Really? Oh,
The ideas of Kirk split apart and put back together, and the will to conquer that, and ideas about From Naked Time, about No Beach to Walk On, and all of these things that we've seen in developing Kirk's character, and all the way to City on the Edge of Forever and losing his true love. And then he finally gets the opportunity to have a life that he never could have had. And so I've been thinking a lot about that and how, and so, but I've not watched Paradise Syndrome since you and I started doing this gig.
mm,
So
mm.
I'm very curious to see if I see it differently watching it, and it'll just be in a few weeks from now because it's,
Yeah, it
I think, the
will.
3rd episode. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the great thing about it is that we
Yeah.
won't have long to wait for that one. Well, one of the episodes, absolutely, Day of the Dove is my number one. Like
Right.
I can't wait to do that deep dive, but at the same time, I don't want to rush to get to that point because that would mean that we're really close to the end of Enterprise Incidents for the original series. But the other episode that has, just like Metamorphosis, is an episode that grew on me over the
Mm.
years, that it has grown to me in such a way that it means more to me now as a grown up than it ever did when I was a kid. This other episode from the 3rd season is one that is absolutely, more than any other episode in the 3rd season, grown more on me over the years. And that is All Our Yesterdays. What an episode. This is an episode that I watch a lot. I watch it a lot. And after our conversations, especially with the way they relate to the Spock McCoy relationship, especially after that scene in the cell in Bread and Circuses. I can't wait to get into that conversation with you when they are back in time in the past of Sarpedon. And and I just love the dynamic that Kirk is split from Spock and McCoy, and Kirk gets back to the Atavachron, and he's trying to find Spock and McCoy. And this was the second to the last episode that was filmed, and it should have been the last, because think about it, that last image you see in all our yesterdays of the Enterprise speeding away from Sarpedon when it disintegrates after the supernova, like that just would have been a great image to kind of free Star Trek on. Is there another episode that you have in your like can't wait to do a deep dive?
Yes. I mean, there's some really good episodes. I mean, they're just episodes that I enjoyed, like the Enterprise incident. I like the Tholian web a lot. But I'm looking at that second half of season 3 and some rough stuff in there.
There's going to be
that I really, because it's funny in the first season when there's so many good episodes, and even things like Mud's Women, are kind of average. And so when we got to Alternative Factor, which is the first one that I genuinely think is a bad episode, it was fun to rip it up. It was fun to sort of go, this is why this doesn't work. But I don't want that to be my job. You know what I mean? Like criticizing what's wrong with an episode after a certain point isn't that much fun. Mm-hmm. So I do have concerns as we go along.
Well, one thing I'll point out now, Steve, is that if Star Trek had aired the way it was shot in production order, it would have been a very different story. Because as we know, the first episode that was filmed, is very different from the first episode that aired.
Right.
And after season 2 premiered with a mock time, which was a Spock episode, and you had that last moment where Spock is so excited that Jim is still alive. I mean, that was a love letter to the fans by giving them the first look at Vulcan. So the first episode to air in the third season, as you know, was Spock's Brain. But if the first 4 episodes that were shot were the first 4 episodes that aired, our first, those first 4 episodes we would have seen are Spectre of the Gun, A Land of Troyes, the Enterprise incident, and the Paradise Syndrome.
Yep.
Those 4 episodes are actually really good. And if you loved season 1 and season 2 of Star Trek, and you put your reputation on the line to sign a petition or send a letter into NBC, and you saw that the first 4 episodes were those 4 episodes, you would have been like, this was worth it. But then they got Spock's Brain and thought, maybe this was not worth it. But having said that, when I get to the episodes that I hope will improve after our deep dive, I wouldn't say it's first on my list, but one episode that is on my list as one that I hope improves after our conversation is indeed Spock's Brain. How do you feel about Spock's Brain?
I don't hate it as much as everyone else hates it. It is real stupid at certain points. It's real sexist. It becomes more sexist, as time goes on. There is 2 or 3 lines or moments in it that I've always liked and just kind of are in my head. But I mean, it's dumb. I mean, it's not, there's a difference between dumb and bad. There are, I don't find Spock's Brain to be unwatchable, where there are a couple in here that I do find pretty much to be unwatchable.
Yeah.
And, and so that's how I feel. How do you feel about it?
Well, I think that when it comes to the myth that Spock's Brain is the worst episode of Star Trek, that comes along with the line, print the legend, right? When the legend becomes fact, print the legend, from The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. But I think that at least for the first half, Spock's Brain is very, very good. There's some ambitious production going on there. I think the music score is fantastic. So fantastic, it would be reused for many, many other episodes that followed. But yeah, when they got to the planet and with the Keepers of Pain and Delight, then it got silly. So not a great episode, but not as bad that as history has made it out to be. But one episode that I really does hope improve, and by improving meaning like I already like it a lot, but just based on the reaction to it, I feel like it's in the mixed category. Like I've seen people say they hate this episode, and I've seen other people say that they like it or love it. And that episode is The Empath. The Empath is a really beautiful episode when it comes down to it. Like when you realize what the Vians, the aliens in that film, in that episode, why they are torturing Kirk and Spock and McCoy, because they want to make sure that Jem's planet is worth saving. Like, wow, I think that's fantastic, and I think that the score composed by George Dunning is beautiful. I think that the set design or lack of it was a great way for the producers to say we have no money. How do we shoot this and make it look
Right.
like an alien world? And I think they did a great job of that.
So the Empath really stands out to me because not that I think it's bad. It is, I believe, the most upsetting episode of Star Trek of the original series, period.
Why?
I find it because it's watching the characters I love be repeatedly tortured. I mean, it just really it upset me when I was young. It upset me the last time I watched it. It was probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago. And it's not one I want to go back to because I don't like watching that happen. I'm very curious to watch it now and go, because I think this is the concept of we want to save this planet and we need to know that they have compassion. Well, that's interesting. I have a feeling I'm going to have a real problem with it when I watch it this time and really thinking about it. So I'm very curious to watch it. And I think it may go way up in my mind. It may go down. It may just continue to upset me, which it's done before.
Well, I understand that completely. And it is really hard to see our beloved characters tortured like that. But again, the payoff of it is so rewarding. Like that episode really, as the saying goes, it sticks the landing. It is, really just a beautiful episode. That last moment on the bridge when Scotty brings up that line about the merchant. I think it just really hits me in the heart. But you want to talk about an episode, Steve, where I found it to be upsetting, one that did not stick the landing, and I hated seeing my favorite characters tortured in such a way that I have not watched this episode in a long time. That episode is Plato's Stepchildren.
It is this is one of the weird ones because it's one of the most important in the sense that it's the first interracial kiss. And yeah, I agree. It is. I don't think it's a good episode. And watching them, it's not. You know what's funny? There are two different kinds of torture because the torture in the Empath is physical torture, and the torture in Plato's Stepchildren is humiliation.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're so right.
And they both suck to watch. Even though our actors are doing their best, they're putting it all into it. Plato's Stepchildren is definitely a weird one.
And that torture scene in particular, the one where Spock is forced to cry and Kirk is like acting, whining like a horse. Like it just goes on and on and on. It's just like, okay, it's like I gotta look away.
Well, and it's stupid. Honestly, like that's how I feel. It's like, well, this is dumb. Like, why are they doing this? And then the solution that we figure out how to give everybody superpowers, something that we never use again, that'd be kind of useful some other time. It's just, there's a lot of things that are pretty silly in that episode.
But there is one saving grace in that episode, and that is the way that Alexander, way, like here you have this episode for all the reasons that I completely agree with you, make it an unpleasant episode for me. But the way that Alexander is like so taken with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and Kirk says that line to Alexander about, where we come from, size and race and color mean nothing and nobody has the power. And then at the end, when Kirk says, I'm bringing a visitor to the Enterprise, it like in the middle of all that just humiliation and just so being so upset is like this moment that really just gets me in the heart. Now, you brought up Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, which I've always liked, Steve. And I don't care how heavy-handed it is. I think it's a great episode. I think it's an important episode. And I definitely think that Frank Gorshin's performance
Same. I was going to say same thing. I love Frank Gorshin.
He is great.
Well, I mean, I loved him in Batman as the Riddler, and he is. I think he kills it in that episode. So yeah, I agree. He's. It'll be interesting. You know, at the end of the previous 2 seasons, we've talked about our favorite guest stars. I don't know if there are any towering guest stars in season 3. I haven't really thought about it, but Frank Gorshin's going to be in the competition for one of my favorite guest stars without question.
For sure, for sure. Frank Gorshin and Michael Ansara as
Mm,
Kang from Day of
yeah,
the Dead. Michael Ansara, I think he was the best actor to play a Klingon in the original series. But no, and also in the scene in Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, where Kirk threatens to destroy the Enterprise if they,
yeah.
don't go back to Arianis to save the planet, and he's like, "I will destroy it." Like it's a great scene. One more episode that I hope improves for other people on our deep dive is Wink of an Eye. What's your take on that one?
I like it. I think it's a totally solid episode. I think there's a couple of weird, don't quite make sense things in it, but I think, you know, we talked about them sort of running out of ideas a bit in season 2, and we're kind of back here again with computers and stuff like that. I think Wink of an Eye is a very interesting science fiction idea. You know,
I really like Wink of an Eye. We talked about how an episode like By Any Other Name is a solid second tier episode of the second season. I think of Wink of an Eye as a solid second tier episode of the third season. Now, a second tier episode of season 3 isn't as good as a second
yeah.
tier episode of season 2, but it's still better than the episodes I'm about to bring up now.
It's funny that you say that with By Any Other Name, because I've always put those two together. Wink of an Eye and By Any Other Name. Yeah. Partially it's because of a love interest in a sexy outfit, but like there's something, but we have these people that have a machine that has taken over the ship and we have to figure out how to stop them. There's a similarity there. So it's funny that you brought that up.
That is a really good point. I never thought about that similarity, but you're right. There absolutely is. And now my next question for you, Steve, is what episodes are you dreading on the deep dive?
So there are several. I will start with the ones that I'm dreading less. But I am not only am I not a fan of Turnabout Intruder, but I have real problems with it. And my guess is my problems I haven't watched it in a long time. My problems will not get smaller. They will get bigger. If
Mhm.
I'm really focusing on paying attention to it. I think it's really problematic. I don't like Savage Curtain. I know some people like it more. I don't particularly. There, by the way, also a bunch of totally forgettable episodes. I don't hate them, but like The Lights of Zatar and That Which Survives, and they're like, whatever, they're fine. I don't hate them. And then there is one episode that more than any other episode of Star Trek, I truly hate. And that is And the Children Shall Lead.
I am with you. I hate that episode. So I'm going to have a challenge for you, Steve.
Okay.
Are you? Let me know if you're up for this challenge. You can think
Uh-huh.
about it. You don't have to decide right now. Listen, I don't like it. I know you don't like it. I'm sure a lot of enterprisers listening to Enterprise Incidents also do not like And the Children Shall Lead. My challenge to you is to look for the good in it. Like really lean into what worked more than what did not work. Then again, maybe that could be nothing at all, in which case, it's a takedown.
I'm sure Nimoy and Shatner and D. Kelly, they're good actors. Like, I'm sure there are things in it that aren't bad, but the bad stuff, real bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So many years ago, so Ben Stiller, actor, director,
Mm-hmm.
producer, he's the executive producer right now on that show Severance, which is fantastic.
Amazing.
So back, I think it was in 2007 or 2008, I met him because he was filming a scene for Tropic Thunder, and he was using the set over at Access Hollywood on the NBC lot. And I know he's a big Star Trek fan, and
Right.
I was the second producer on that shoot. So I'd interviewed him before, but I had to keep it just like to whatever movie I was talking to him about. But because I had time with him, I said, "Listen, I know you're a big Star Trek fan. I know you love Shatner. I said, I've always wanted to know, what is your favorite episode of Star Trek?" And his response to me was not what I expected at all. I thought he'd say one of the greats, City, Mirror Mirror, Bounce of Terror, one of those, Doomsday. His response, and I literally said, like I couldn't contain myself. I actually said, "Are you crazy?" His response was the way to Eden.
I don't hate it as much as everybody else does, but it's not good.
Oh, it's not good. Dude,
Yeah.
come on. I mean,
It's not good. I mean, it's funny. Like, I don't hate it as much as in The Children Shall Lead. And maybe part of this is because I'm a kid who grew up in the 70s in Marin County, California, with two parents who went to Berkeley, who was in Berkeley all the time. I grew up surrounded by hippies. Like, hippies was just normal. You know, that was the camp counselors at my summer camp. They were all hippies. So, like, maybe I had a special affinity for it in some way. I don't know. But again, it's going to be interesting. Why I haven't watched it in a real long time.
I have not only have I not rewatched that episode in a real long time, I have avoided it like the plague. Same with and the children shall eating it. You know what you said about like the Savage Curtain and Lights of Zetar. Uh, they're not bad episodes. They're just whatever. If I watched them, I would be engaged and I would enjoy them, but they're not ones that I would seek out to watch. Another one that I think is kind of people kind of like, but it's another one that I've always disliked. What's your take, Steve, on Requiem for Methuselah?
Uh, I don't like it. And I think, and again, I haven't watched it in a while. I think Kirk's behavior is totally out of character.
Yep.
I think what happens, I think he not only in my memory is falls in love with this person for really no particular reason, but then mistreats her and is awful. I think he is totally not being Captain Kirk in that episode. That's my memory.
That is exactly how I've always felt. And that is why I too have not liked that episode. I just feel like Kirk is totally out of character, that he would sacrifice the Enterprise for the love of someone he just met like that. I
Yeah.
mean, look, I mean, in some ways he did that. He was going there and sitting on the edge of forever, but then came to his senses. But I certainly bought that romance, with Kirk and Edith Keeler more than I did the romance in Requiem for Methuselah. Even though the last 5 minutes of the episode are really touching, when Spock gives him the mind
Spock.
meld, it says forget. But is it worth the 45 minutes to get to that point? I don't think it is.
By the way, Requiem for Methuselah.
Yep.
It's a great title. I really like that title.
Great title.
And I like the idea. I like the idea of this person who's lived forever. That's really interesting. I just don't think the episode's good.
Well, other episodes that I, just to, I can't wait to talk about the Tholian Web. I can't wait to talk about, I know Ralph Sinetsky will be rejoining us for Is There in Truth No Beauty? His first episode that he's directed in a while. And it's the first episode he did for the third season. And so that's going to be a great conversation. But overall, I am very much looking forward to another season-long deep dive with my good friend, Steve Morris, because doing these deep dive conversations every week and then re-listening to our deep dive conversation after Steve has worked his magic to edit it and to add in the clips. It is so much fun. It is so rewarding. And I just want to again thank all of you, our fans, our supporters, our listeners, our enterprisers for your support.
Well, and I'm just going to say the same thing. I can't wait for another 24 great conversations with my good friend Scott Mans, who's in every single episode going to teach me things that I didn't know about one of the greatest television shows of all time. And I also know that Scott's going to bring in some fantastic guests that are going to make this show even better. So it's going to be, even though there's some episodes I don't like, I still think it's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. And just like people have pointed out, sometimes when you do a deep dive on an episode that isn't that great or is flat out bad, like the alternative factor, those have been some of our best conversations.
So we hope that you're as excited about season 3 as we are, and we would love to hear about some of your favorite episodes and maybe even some of your least favorite episodes. And the best place to do that is on social media. You can visit us on Facebook, just search for Enterprise Incidents. But if Twitter is your thing, then it would be Enter Incidents. And if you're really into Instagram, Enterprise Incidents. Scott, how would people find you on the webs?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Movie Mance. And be sure, like Steve said, go to our Facebook page, Enterprise Incidents. We are getting a lot of engagement from enterprisers on Enterprise Incidents. I post something there almost every day and then link it to all the other Star Trek group pages. And we get a lot of engagement. I think a lot of people have discovered Enterprise Incidents because of these other Star Trek groups. So we are grateful for that. And definitely go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts, because that really gets noticed for us to move up on the charts at Apple Podcasts. And Steve, how about you? Where can people find you?
SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram, of course, the Cinephiles podcast. And maybe you should check out my Great White Shark documentary, Great White Shark Beyond the Cage of Fear, which is available on Amazon Prime.
And after all that talk, all that build up, all that excitement, maybe a little bit of dread, we are at that point. We are well on our way into season 3 of Star Trek, season 3 of Enterprise Incidents. So the next episode of Enterprise Incidents, Draw Clanton. That's right. Spectre of the Gun. The first episode filmed for season 3 of Star Trek is our first deep dive conversation on Enterprise Incidents. Until then, keep going boldly.